Started this term with the endocrine system, okay? Remember we compared our endocrine system to our nervous system? So we looked at the differences in them. The nervous system was fast acting with a short-term response. The nervous system used a neurotransmitter as its messenger, and its target cell, the nervous system target cell, was really, really, really close to the nervous system itself. We compared that with the endocrine system, and it was slower acting but longer lasting. It used hormones as its messenger, and the target cell was very distant from the endocrine gland, or from where the hormone was produced. The endocrine system overview. The endocrine glands, we said, were ductless, and that was kind of not a good way to look at it. Remember, it said the endocrine glands do not dump their product into a duct. Okay? The exocrine glands dump their product into a duct. The system includes the pituitary, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the adrenals, the pineal, and the thymus. Two of those were in the brain, the pituitary and the pineal. Pituitary and the pineal are in the brain. There were some other organs with endocrine tissues, the pancreas, the gonads, the hypothalamus. Our small intestine, stomach, kidneys, and hearts also produce a little bit of hormones. The hormones we classified. There were amino acid-based hormones, there were the steroid-based hormones, and there were the eicosanoids. We blew the eicosanoids off and said they were the prostaglandins. So that left us two, the amino acid-based and the steroid-based. The amino acid-based hormones are proteins. The amino acid-based hormones are proteins. The steroid-based hormones are cholesterol-based. We looked at the mechanism of actions of hormones. Hormones altered target cell activity, and they did that in a couple of different ways. They caused cellular changes in their target cells. There were two types of mechanisms. There was second messenger mechanisms, and the amino acid base used mostly second messengers, and those second messengers were cyclic AMP and PIP calcium. DAG, DAG, and IP3 were also second messenger mechanisms. The steroid hormones use direct gene activation. The steroid hormones bind directly to intercellular receptors, activating it. We looked at the hormones and their specificity. Hormones influence only one specific target cell, mainly because that cell had to have a receptor for that hormone. And remember, we said the receptors were dynamic. We could change them. We could upregulate them, get more, and we could downregulate them, reduce or lose those receptors. We talked about the control of hormone release. It used a negative feedback mechanism, and the endocrine glands could be stimulated to manufacture and release the hormones. There were types of stimulation. Humoral stimulation based on blood levels of the hormone, neural stimulation based on the neural stimulus like in the adrenal glands, and hormonal stimulus where one hormone causes the production of another hormone. We then started through each of the individual endocrine glands. And remember, I gave you a handout. And the handout broke down each gland, its target cell, and what happened if it had too much or too little. Remember those? Study those 2 pages, okay? That puts it in a really easy sequence to get those questions. The pituitary, also called the hypophysis, it sets in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It is connected to the hypothalamus by a little string called the infundibulum. Pituitary had 2 lobes, a posterior lobe and an anterior lobe. The posterior lobe was the neural lobe because it got its hormones directly from the hypothalamus. The anterior lobe was the adenohypophysis. It manufactures a couple of dozen of its own. The anterior lobe made up mostly of epithelial tissue. The anterior lobe's connection to the hypothalamus was not a direct neural connection, but a blood connection through the hypophyseal portal vein, the anterior lobe hypophyseal portal vein. We looked at the gonadotropins, FSH and LH. They regulate the function of the gonads. They are not antagonistic. FSH and LH are not antagonistic. They are synergistic. They help each other out. The posterior pituitary and the hypothalamic hormones. The posterior pituitary has two major hormones, ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. ADH and oxytocin chemically very similar, but physiologically very, 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 very different. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions and is the trigger for milk ejection. ADH inhibits urine production and is important in our water balance. So they are similar chemically, but very differently physiologically. The thyroid gland, located in the neck, just below the larynx. It has two types of cells, follicular cells and parafollicular cells. Follicular cells produce thyroglobulin, the precursor to thyroxine. The parafollicular cells produce calcitonin. There is a condition of hyperthyroidism called Graves' disease. Graves' disease is an autoimmune condition. It increases the patient's metabolic rate. They are nervous, they have weight loss, they have exophthalmosis where their eyes bulge out, and it can come from a partially destroyed or removed thyroid. We talked about the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands produce parathyroid hormone, and it is the antagonist to calcitonin. Parathyroid gland antagonist to calcitonin. We talked about atrionatriuretic peptide. Remember that guy? Atrionatriuretic peptide. AMP is a hormone produced or secreted by the atria of the heart during times of stress, which means that blood pressure is high. That AMP does not affect the heart. It goes to the kidneys and blocks the formation of renin. Renin is the hormone in the kidney that pulls salt back into the renal tubules. If we pull salt back in, water follows it back in. If we don't pull the salt in, the water goes out as urine. So if we pee more, then our plasma level goes down, our pressure goes down. So AMP controls blood pressure by blocking the formation of another hormone in the urine. We talked about the adrenal medulla, and it secreted the catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine. There was a condition called phenochromocystoma, a rare catecholamine secreting tumor. Most of the time it's in the adrenal medulla, but it can be anywhere. It causes a massive, uncontrolled, sympathetic reflex reaction. The pancreas, behind the stomach, it has both exocrine and endocrine tissues. It has Ansar cells that are exocrine. It secretes the digestive enzymes that go into the GI tract. It has the pancreatic islet cells of Langerhans. Those pancreatic islets are divided into alpha cells that produce glucagon and beta cells that produce insulin. Glucagon is our hyperglycemic hormone. It increases the blood sugar in our blood. Insulin is our hypoglycemic hormone. It sends that glucose into the cell. Glucagon stops that insulin or that sugar from going into the cell. So glucagon, hyperglycemia. Insulin, hypoglycemia. We talked about diabetes in the two types. There was type 1, insulin dependent, formerly called juvenile, and then type 2 that we call non-insulin dependent. Type 2, formerly called mature onset, occurs after 40. We do not treat mature onset type 2 with insulin. We use diet and exercise to treat them. We moved to blood. Blood is connective tissue. It is living cells surrounded by a non-living matrix. We talked about the hematocrit. When we look at blood and use a centrifuge and separate it, 45% of the blood is made up of erythrocytes, red blood cells. The white cells and the platelets account for less than 1%. So the blood is 45% red blood cells, less than 1% white blood cells and platelets, and 55% plasma. We talked about the function of those cells. The blood is involved in distribution, regulation, and protection. It distributes all of the nutrients and oxygen. It regulates our temperature, our pH, our fluid volume, and it protects us with our white blood cells and also the blood clots to protect itself. We looked at plasma. Plasma, 90% water, 8% proteins. Then 2% were nitrogenous waste, like urea, ammonia, and creatinine salts. We moved to the formed elements, the cells, the RBCs. Red blood cells contain hemoglobin. The RBCs carry oxygen, little bit of carbon dioxide, but their main job is to transport oxygen. We looked at disorders of the RBCs, anemia, reduced oxygen carrying capability. There were types of anemia, polycythemia, there were types of anemia, hemolytic and hemorrhagic and pernicious anemia. We looked at polycythemia. Polycythemia was an increase in RBCs, so the blood became very thick. There was a specific polycythemia called polycythemia vera. Polycythemia vera indicated bone marrow cancer. We moved to the white blood cells, the leukocytes, the white blood cells. The white blood cells we divided into granulocytes and agranulocytes. The granulocytes were the neutrophils, the eosinophils, and the basophils. The agranulocytes were the lymphocytes and the monocytes. There was a saying that tells you how they occur normally in the body. Never let monkeys eat bananas. N, neutrophils. L, lymphocytes. M, monocytes. E, eosinophils, and bananas, basophils. So never let monkeys eat bananas. We talked about the leukemia and the cells that they come from. When you look at the leukemias, it involves the stem cell, the hemocytoblast,